Well, good morning, everybody, formally, and welcome to our webinar Wednesday. Food Focus likes to make sure that on a Wednesday we chat about some very interesting issues and very relevant issues, and we try and get experts in industry to provide us with information to help you, the listener, to make an informed decision. And today is no example, is no exception. I have to say, I know I've done a webinar similar to what we're going to be talking about earlier in the COVID lockdown, but I really feel that there is a need to have this discussion again. There are a number of reasons, and one of the most important relates to the fact that many restaurants will be opening for business soon, where we as the public will be able to go and enjoy a sit-down meal in a restaurant environment, and obviously we would like to provide as much guidance as possible to that particular sector. Also, we have had some experience in many food companies where we've had employees test positive for COVID. And unfortunately, we've had to make some changes to the way we do business, and we've had to introduce additional cleaning mechanisms. We've had to introduce additional mechanisms for social distancing. We've all experienced the impact of the pandemic in our food handling facilities. But there are a number of areas where we are potentially not making decisions based on the right information. And so, although we've chatted about some of this before, I really felt the need to talk again about what the important requirements are around cleaning, decontamination, what is the difference, what chemicals should we be using, what's the lowdown on hand sanitizers, what should we actually be using, what are the right chemicals, how can we ensure that the protocols that we're using are in fact in compliance with our legal framework, but more importantly are going to be effective against any potential infection. So that's the reason why I feel like I'm repeating myself, but actually I feel it's very necessary repetition, because I don't want people to pay money that they don't need to pay and to make the wrong decision. It gives me great pleasure to introduce to you today's speakers. And as I said, I have asked specifically for certain people to join me because I wanted to make sure that we had representatives that could really talk to us from a place of technical expertise, but not only that, but from a place of experience, because all of them have been involved in answering these questions in a number of different ways during the course of the pandemic, both here and overseas. Andy Booth is joining us from the UK. And so I just felt that it was important to have an expert panel giving us some advice today. So I have Brett Osram, the CEO from the Ecowise Group. As I said, Andy Booth coming in from SGS, he's the Global Technical Manager. He's located in the UK. I have Dr. Chantal Swart-Pistor. She's coming in from SMT Labs and she's located in the Free State. And then I have Mrs. Tando Majolejo, I apologize. She's the Operations Manager at the NRCS. And I think today she's sitting in Pretoria and she's going to be chatting to us about the legal framework. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Brett, to start us from the top in terms of cleaning and making sure that we understand the processes that are required for cleaning. So Brett, I'm handing over to you. While I'm handing over to Brett, just a couple of points about Brett. It's really great to have someone like the CEO of the Ecowise Group joining us. And so thank you so much for your time, Brett. I really do appreciate it as you go into presenter view for us. He has a Bachelor of Commerce from the Pretoria University. He's got 22 years experience of international senior management, and that's been within food production and sanitation services. He's a co-founder of the Ecowise Group, and they're a specialized outsourced service group that provides cleaning and hygiene solutions. And that was really the reason why I wanted to talk to Brett, because they have been involved in assisting companies with cleaning services prior to the pandemic and during the pandemic within the food industry. And so it was very important for me to speak to someone who has experience and expertise in dealing with this particular aspect I know there are many new cleaning companies and cleaning companies that have not necessarily been involved in the food industry before that are now offering these services. But Brett, I really wanted to get an understanding from someone who's had some experience. So please, won't you take us away with your presentation so that we have an understanding of what you've been doing and what should we be doing in this regard? Over to you.
Linda, thank you very much, and thank you to Food Focus for inviting me onto this webinar. So I think before I actually start with the presentation itself, I think servicing the food industry for as long as we have, and you know, the food industry's growth over this time, actually the food industry as such was quite well equipped, I believe, for COVID in a sense that hand hygiene has always been higher on the priority list. So if you go into the majority of food facilities, there's hand wash stations, there's hand sanitation stations. So I think when COVID broke, the food industry as such was well positioned, where a lot of other industries have had to scramble, you know, to get these hand sanitation stations and hand dispensers, etc. And I think it's also going to be quite a challenge for the restaurant industry, you know, opening up. But we can touch on those points a little bit later. So I just wanted to maybe sort of just define some terminology, starting with cleaning. So, you know, cleaning is really, and again, the myth, you know, so what does one have to do? So there's three sort of buzzwords going around, the one being cleaning, the one being sanitation, and the one being decontamination. So cleaning is practically the removal of debris from surfaces. Sanitation is the reduction of the number of harmful bacteria to acceptable levels. And then decontamination, which is the big buzzword at the moment, is the removal and or the killing of contaminants such as microorganisms, which would include viruses and bacteria. So I think what's important in this context is that certainly, again, in the food industry, there is a cleaning and disinfection that happens on a daily basis as a matter of course. It's part of the prerequisite program. I think when you start extending this a little bit wider, you know, and people are talking deep cleaning, you know, in an office environment, I don't believe it's getting deep cleaned on a daily basis. I don't think it's practical in certain retail shops, etc. I think what's important in those environments is much more the sanitation and the constant cleaning of the high touch point areas. So like I said, in non-processing environments, cleaning and sanitation would include the wipe down of the high touch points areas. And again, you know, just to elaborate in terms of risk mitigation, it's obviously foot traffic, and foot traffic brings the hands, and the high touch point areas would be things like toilets, taps, doors, biometric readers, counters, points of sale areas, credit card keypads, telephones, hand railings, etc. So decontaminations are in our opinion, and there's been a hell of a lot of questions asked around, you know, do you need to do a decontamination if a lot of the schools have been asking if schools have been sitting vacant. My short answer to that question is no. If you haven't had any foot traffic and businesses have been closed down and you've had no foot traffic, the answer is that no, you do not require decontamination. And in my opinion, it would be a waste of costs. I believe it should be done predominantly as a reactive measure, unless your budget allows for a preventative measure. I think what's interesting is with the restaurants opening up in this regard is that people are going to vote with their feet, and they're going to also vote with what they feel comfortable. So where they see good sort of hygiene practices being followed, you know, they're going to probably by word of mouth say, you know, I went to this restaurant, it was amazing. They sort of sanitized all the surfaces and the chairs and the tables, and you know, and I think it's going to largely whether a person chooses a preventative or a reactive measure is going to pretty much rest with their budgets. Again, just touching base, if you've been closed for an extended period of time with no employee activity, then our opinion is that a decontamination is not required. and a thorough cleaning sanitation should be adequate. So again, just quickly on the risk assessments, identify the high touch points areas, identify the danger zones that can't be controlled, which would need to cordon off, and identify a safe occupancy threshold. And I think that's going to be critical. People don't want to go into restaurants or retail where they feel people are on top of one another. Precautions, procedures, and resources. So plan the layout to accommodate social distancing, identify approved cleaning and sanitation products, which the panel will touch on. And then, you know, a big question is cleaning frequency. So in our opinion, the high touch points should be cleaned as an ongoing measure. So certainly in entrances where people are required to touch door handles, there should be a hygiene station with sanitizers there where you can sanitize your hands and touch the door handle. But in other areas which maybe aren't as evident in terms of like an entrance, we believe it should be done 3 times a day. And then again, a lot of information posters should be available to, you know, social distance, wear your mask, wash your hands thoroughly. It would appear that washing of hands is not, you know, it was a big topic initially, and it seems to have become less relevant for some reason, with hand sanitizers taking over. Obviously, the practicality of hand sanitizers that you don't need the soap and water, and generally the alcohols are quick drying, but one shouldn't forget about washing of hands. If a person, you know, what is required if you identify a positive employee? So we're saying that after a suspected positive incident, i.e. a person isn't feeling well, cleaning and sanitation protocols should be implemented immediately. And that's, again, the high touch point areas, you know, the sanitation of those high touch points areas. In the case of a confirmed COVID positive, we're saying that a decontamination protocol is required as part of that reopening strategy. There we would come in with, so when we talk about a decontamination protocol, it's a number of, it's the sum of the parts. So it's the cleaning, it's the disinfection, and we would then take it to the fogging stage. We're actually fogging a suitable disinfectant to reach those areas that you wouldn't normally reach, or maybe you can't reach. Again, focus should be given to high touch point areas and any areas that have been identified as high risk based on the positive employee's movement tracing. So if a positive employee in an office environment was in a certain section of the office or a certain warehouse or something like that, that's where the high focus should be, based on where that person's been moving around and who that person's been in contact with. So what is required daily? We're saying in the non-processing environments, the high touch point wipe downs, incredibly important, monitoring and document cleaning and sanitation procedures constantly, and again, hand sanitizer points in the high traffic areas. And in the processing environments, i.e. a food environment, kitchen environment, we recommend a daily deep cleaning procedures, monitor and document cleaning and sanitation, and again, the hand sanitizers in the high traffic areas. The question of what should you ask a prospective service provider, it would appear, and Linda, you know, further to your introduction, that we've seen a lot of people sort of jumping into the space, and not only on the cleaning and disinfection side, but also the chemical manufacture side. So what we would recommend is that the questions that you should be asking of a service provider is that what chemicals will be used for the cleaning, sanitation, and decontamination. Are all the chemicals certified? I think that's critically important. You know, the WHO, the World Health Authority, came out that it needs to be greater than 70% alcohol. But in saying that, you know, there's a whole lot of different raw materials associated with the alcohols. And I mean, certainly I would feel a lot more comfortable if the supply of the chemicals could produce certification that the chemicals have been validated and trialed and tested. I would ask a service provider, what is the lead time for implementation? In our experience, we've seen, you know, when there's a positive COVID case, the reaction times need to be within a couple of hours, just based on the risk. And does the service include a cleaning and sanitation protocol before decontamination? And I think that's important. So if the environment allows for it, certainly I would be recommending a thorough clean and sanitation as part of the decontamination protocol. And questions of how long after decontamination can a facility be occupied? Our view is that one should air it out and allow for 8 hours at least. Depending on the facility, you may have to allow for the Department of Health to actually give you the green light to open it up. And then do they have decontaminated procedure and risk assessments that accompany the services? I think again, I think COVID is a bigger picture, and it is the sum of the parts. And I've touched on this previously, where contact tracing needs to be in place, risk assessments need to be in place. You don't want to, people that have been in direct contact with someone that's tested positive need to be isolated. They need to be actively managed in terms of how they're feeling. If they're not feeling well, then obviously sent for further testing. But this is all in addition to. So, the one can't be seen in isolation of the other. And then does the service provider have any certification or verification documents that the services have been completed? Because depending again on the facility, these will be required to reopen the facility. Yeah, so I think I hope I've given some type of overview to the myth. But in our opinion, certainly in the restaurant segment, is that people are going to go where they feel comfortable, and I think that's critically important, and where they're actually visually seeing great hygiene practices being practiced. Linda, thanks.
Thanks, Brett. I couldn't agree with you more. I think just in certain retail settings, I've felt less comfortable because there's been either too many people for the space, or there hasn't been proper hygiene measures. So I think that's a very, very sound advice that you've given. A couple of points. You mentioned fogging as part of decontamination. But what I find interesting about the fogging process is fogging would be to assist in decontaminating areas that are difficult to reach. But wouldn't that then by implication mean that it would be difficult to contaminate? Correct.
So I think that again, I think, and maybe the other panelists can speak to it. It's the same principle. We know that COVID is spread through droplets. So in all likelihood, it's a sneeze, it's a cough, it's somebody touching their mouth, their nose, and then sort of transferring that virus onto reachable surfaces. I suppose the fogging is not so much as it's probably just a blanket coverage to ensure that you're getting that coverage. I think the risk lies in maybe you clean a door handle but you don't clean the entire door frame, or maybe you clean a table but not the legs, which may have been touched. So I think it's just on the fogging, it's probably just a blanket approach to ensure your coverage is greater.
Yeah, that does make sense to me. I think what's also interesting is, so you mentioned a certificate, or rather chemicals that need to be in some, or proof that the chemicals have been validated. Obviously, I'm going to, chat to Mrs. Magolejo about that specifically from a legal perspective. But, I think if I had to, you're involved with manufacturing chemicals as well as providing cleaning services. What does that actually mean for you as a manufacturer? I mean, what do you have to do to be able to prove that to me as a potential customer?
So, I mean, as a manufacturer of chemicals, and Mrs. Malacheko will be able to, attest to it, is that there's a process. There's a process of validation, toxicology, that what you're providing for the consumer is in fact safe within a food environment, is in fact food safe. And I think, and there's obviously a process that, corrosion, etc., etc. All these boxes need to be ticked to ensure that the product, when ultimately gets used, is safe for use and safe for the consumer. And anyone who's not going through this process, there's no assurance to the consumer that this is in fact in place. And I think that's something that comes to mind now, these spray tunnels. You know, I mean, you're seeing them all over, although I think they have lost a little bit of momentum because the World Health Authority have come out very strongly saying, guys, we don't agree with this. We don't know if the chemicals being used are in fact safe, and we don't, again, it's high touch points. So if you're wearing a mask, you know, you're practicing social distancing and you're washing and sanitizing your hands, they're unnecessary. So I think that there's a lot of fear mongering by the media. There's a lot of, you know, everyone that's trying to jump on the bandwagon. But again, I just think that people have gone to the lengths of certification, validation, testing against different microorganisms to see the effectiveness of the chemical. And in my opinion, these are the products that should be getting used.
Absolutely. Right. So thanks very much. We're going to talk more about the specific standards that we would need to confirm our products against. But thanks, Brett, very much for your input at this point. I'm now going to hand over to Mrs. Magolego, and I'm really, really honored to have you. So thank you so much for being with us. I really appreciate you making yourself available. I know that you've had to answer many of these questions many times because there is a lot of a concern or a lot of confusion with respect to this aspect. So I really do appreciate you being with us. She's the operations manager from the National Regulator for Compulsory Specifications. And she has been responsible for ensuring that there is a framework for disinfectants. And so she is responsible for approvals of chemicals, materials, and mechanical units at the National Regulator for Compulsory Specifications. She has, in fact, a chemical engineering qualification. And she's been with the regulator for she's been in management with the regulator for 14 years. So, Mrs. Magolego, thank you so much. I'm going to hand over to you now, because what I would like to know from you is what are the legal requirements that we have to have that are in place, and what should we be complying with, and more importantly, what questions should we be asking for? Over to you. Thank you so much.
Good morning, everyone. So let me start with the hand sanitizers, because that's going to be a very short. We were requested as the NRCS to draft a compulsory specification for hand sanitizers because currently there isn't regulatory requirement for hand sanitizers, except for what we call scrubs, which are used in clinical settings in the health industry. So those would be regulated by SAPRA as medical devices. So your scrubs that are used by doctors and nurses during operations and things like that, that would be Department of Health through SAPRA as medical devices. And anything else that is used in the agricultural setting would be then registered with Department of Agriculture, right? So the rest of the hand sanitizers, which are almost, we can call them cosmetic, because they would fall under the Cosmetics Act. Those are not really regulated. There is a standard with SABS that they're currently using for alcohol-based sanitizers, which stands for 490, but there's no regulatory requirement that these need to be approved by anyone. So the scheme with SABS is then it's on a voluntary basis, like any other certification that you have with SABS. And for us as the regulator, there's nothing published yet. I understand the compulsory specification is still sitting at the minister's, let me say, office. We hadn't have feedback yet. That's on the hand sanitizer, hand rub front. So what we then look at as the NRCS is the chemical disinfectants on inanimate surfaces. Now, these cover wide what might be used in the agricultural setting, but there are exclusions to the scope. So we use the definitions as in SANS 54885. That's the definitions that we use for chemical disinfectant. And we look at public health claims, which means it's an antibacterial, antivirus, or something, whatever claim you are making on your regarding your disinfectant. And we exclude antiseptics and any disinfectant that's exclusively used in veterinary areas. So, for example, animal husbandry and things like that, those are excluded. And treated articles, these are wipes. These are some of your scorers are treated with chemical disinfectants. These are excluded, and we focus on the chemical used to treat rather than the actual wipe itself. We're interested in the chemical that's used. So when you do your approval, we look at your formulation. So we register the formulation, what your active ingredient is, what the rest of the ingredients are that make up that formulation. That's what we're interested in. And we're interested in your public health claim and your area of use. So we cover in our area of use, we cover domestic, institution, industrial, food, and medical. So you will manufacture your disinfectant and you'll say it will be used. Some are used in all of these areas, or you pick where it is used. Now there's standards for each of the different areas. Basically, we've divided it into two, for medical and food, and for the rest, which is institutional, domestic, or industrial use. And we've defined it into that. So your approved chemicals would then have a registration number. This number that's appearing on your screen now is the new format for the number. The old format would have been an Act 5 or an Act 29 with the long number on it. That proves that the disinfectant is registered, which means it's been verified that it's been tested. It passed the tests for the claims that are made for that disinfectant, and we are happy with it, markings and everything as the regulator, and then we register it and it's approved. Now, the information on what's registered, you will see appearing on our website. If you go on our website, we have a list there. So we look at things like packaging now. As you understand, these are chemicals. Chemicals react. So we've zoomed into packaging in this new version of the compulsory specification. So we look at packaging requirements, what type of material you're using, and all those things. We look at breakages of containers, leakages, spills, transportation, storage. Those are the things that we verify that they comply. And usually these would come with testing of the packaging and all of that to test if particular formulation does not react with a specific type of packaging. Therefore, you can't use that packaging because it would either break and cause leakages and spillage, which means you can't store your chemical basically because it will constantly be reacting with your packaging. And then we look at as well whether your what we used to call MSDS, which is SDS now, you've given the buyer or all the information regarding your warnings about the product that you are selling. So those are some of the general requirements for chemical disinfectants to be approved. So the process is that you as the manufacturer of a disinfectant or importer would need to have pre-approval from the regulator before you make your product available. Once you get that pre-approval, you would have the number that I've mentioned on your labeling. That's a requirement that it must be on your labeling so that the user or consumer is able to have proof that your product is approved and that the regulator has verified that it does actually comply and it does actually do what it says it will do for you, which is protect you from any virus or bacteria. Now, when it comes to viruses, right, the requirement is that if you claim that your product will kill the influenza virus, for instance, we need that to be marked on your packaging, and you shall have a test report that proves that it was tested against those viruses that you claim that it will kill. So you can't just make a claim that it will protect you against the coronavirus. We understand that especially alcohol-based disinfectants, at about above 60%, the alcohol starts killing the bacteria or reducing the bacteria or viruses. But we still, as a requirement, have said that we want any virus that you're claiming against, you shall mention the virus specifically on your label, and you shall provide us with proof of testing the efficacy on that particular virus. Okay. And then there's basically two processes almost. You comply to everything, you get your full approval. If, for instance, you have identified a few non-compliances to the requirements, our Act does allow for the NRCS CEO to issue a sales permit exempting you from complying to certain requirements. Now, the procedure within the NRCS for that is that the non-compliances can in no way affect the safety and efficacy of that product. So if your non-compliance is related to efficacy, safety, or health of the user, you will not get a sales permit. We look at soft issues like your SGS doesn't fully comply yet, your markings that don't impact on how the user is supposed to be able to use the product. Those are what's missing. But if your markings, for instance, the markings that specifically tell the user how to use the product and the markings that specifically make claims so that the user understands what the product is supposed to be protecting them against, you will not get a sales permit because those markings impact on the safety of the product. Okay, so just a quick run through that how the approval process works. So the manufacturer or importer would then apply to the NRCS, provide us what we call a technical file. We will register the task to check if your levies, your fees, and everything is up to date with us. We do the examination of your file with submission of all the evidence that's required, your test reports and things like that. We allow you one opportunity to correct any findings that we have on your technical file. You have 30 days to submit those back to us, your correction back to us, and we'll do a second examination to check what you've submitted as correction, whether that now complies and completes the file. If after the second examination you still do not comply, we'll reject your application. You will start over. If your product does comply, your application then gets approved, right? So after this process, or even parallel to this process, we have surveillance inspectors that go out to inspect and ensure continued compliance of these products. Even currently, we have inspectors out. We've received with this COVID-19, with everyone and anyone manufacturing disinfectants, we received a number of, we call them customer concerns regarding non-approved products. And so we have inspectors out sanctioning those products. Some products had to be pulled off the shelves because they're not approved and they don't have proof that they are actually safe to use. So these processes are parallel. So even after you have your approval, we still do surveillance inspections to ensure that the product continuously complies. Now, the sales permit process is similar to the approval process. The only difference is the sales permit goes to a committee after myself. So I now become the presenter to a committee on the file that I've just examined, and I make a recommendation from my point of view, which is from the technical point of view, regarding technical compliance of the product. And then the committee will make a recommendation to the CEO, taking into account the technical feedback that I would be giving, and looking at all other legal requirements to see that legally, and looking at the risk as well, would we be then in the right in issuing the sales permit, or the risk is just too high, therefore the sales permit should not be issued, rather be rejected. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Thando. And I think what your presentation has highlighted is a couple of very interesting things. So we haven't even had 100 days of lockdown, and so for some of the products on the shelf, you know, they must have done a lot of very, very fancy footwork to get through that 120-day cycle if they were actually registered. But I think what you've said is you have found products that have not been registered. Can I ask you a couple of questions? If I understand correctly, this is the process of registration of disinfectants. This is not a voluntary requirement. This is a mandatory requirement. So you said any disinfectant that is sold in South Africa or imported for inanimate surfaces has to go through this registration. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. It's mandatory. And any. Okay. So there are those that will need dual approval, either with the NRCS and either with SAPRA as a medical device as well, or with the NRCS and Department of Agriculture. Absolutely.
Okay, so that's important. So that means if I have a bottle of disinfectant in my home as a domestic disinfectant, that means that that number should be on that bottle. Is that what I understand correctly?
Yes.
Right. Okay. So that's just very, very important, because the first thing I think we should go and do is go and check our cupboards to make sure that we're actually using chemicals that are legal, regardless of where we bought those. The many products, particularly domestic products, might say kills 99.9% germs. I've seen quite a few of those. Now that's a claim. Am I correct?
Yes, it is a claim, and they should. it should be registered.
Okay, all right. So this
let me give you an example of domestic product. Your dishwashing liquid. You get, it's a detergent, but when they start claiming that it kills 99.9% of germs, now it's becoming a disinfectant. It's now becoming a detergent disinfectant, and that claim they must prove. And you will find on, for instance, your Sunlight dishwashing liquid, the ones that says antibacterial or kills 99.9% germs, they have the NRCS number on it. They'll have the Act number on it. The normal one, which doesn't make those claims, does not have that number on it. Your things like your thick bleach, which is generally your Domestos and things like that, that is a disinfectant. It would have your number, should have the number on it.
Absolutely. And so now we go back to Brett's presentation, and we're using a company to assist us, or we're using chemicals in this process now of decontaminating or sanitation. So in any chemical that's used to reduce the levels of microorganisms, whether it be the SARS-CoV-2 virus or not, all these chemicals should then have this registration. Am I correct?
Yes, they should.
Okay. Great. Thank you very much. I just wanted to make sure that we were clear. I'm still very, very, very concerned about the hand sanitizer issue, because I understood it to be the same as what you have said. And I have received a number of people wanting to sell me hand sanitizers. And when I ask for the SANS 490 certificate, I'm still waiting. So, as you said, it's a voluntary process. And perhaps we should have asked the SABS where they are in terms of the number of products that are being submitted to them. Thank you so much. I'm now going to ask for Dr. Chantal Swart to join us, because we want to actually understand what is it that a company would need to go through in order to ensure that their chemicals do in fact meet this requirement. So I think from that perspective, we need to speak to a laboratory to tell us what is actually involved when I submit a sample, and who better than SMT Labs. And so I have with us Dr. Chantal Swart-Pastor. She has her PhD in microbiology. She received the South African Society of Microbiology Award for the best PhD in 2010. She has a postdoctoral fellowship funded by the Claude Lyon Foundation. She's been in research, and in 2018 she joined SMT Labs as the quality manager, and here she's responsible for the ISO 17025 accreditation of the laboratory and assisting clients in understanding what does the report mean when you say it doesn't kill all these germs that I would like to put on my label. So Chantal, please, over to you. We would like to understand what is actually involved in testing these chemicals. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for the opportunity to participate in this webinar. And I hope that the information that I give to you today will be helpful to ensure that we are producing, selling, and using chemical disinfectants that are up to standard and that are actually effective. So I'll focus on specific key points, which include how to ensure the efficacy of your product, whether you are selling or using it, then available options for testing of efficacy and how the tests are performed, and lastly, some questions that you can ask your supplier, or if you are a supplier, that you could always ask to yourself as well. Especially in the current situation with COVID-19, we see many new disinfectants on the market, and almost every second person is mixing ingredients to make disinfectants. So it is therefore important for us to ensure that the product that we are using or producing is actually doing what it says it should do. So the definition of efficacy is the ability of a product to produce a specific or intended result. Now, the question that you have to ask yourself is, what is the result that you want to achieve? Do you want to use the product or produce a product that destroys bacteria? In other words, it would be bactericidal. Do you want it to be fungicidal, yeasticidal, or virucidal, or a combination of the above that I just mentioned? In which setting do you want to achieve this result? So you have to keep in mind that there are different locations where you can use it in. Is it a food manufacturing plant? Is it a school? Is it for domestic use? And not only do you have to keep that in mind, but you also have to keep in mind that there are clean conditions and dirty conditions that are simulated. So if we speak about clean conditions, it means a surface that has been wiped or washed before the disinfectant is applied, and we often refer to it as not being visibly dirty. Dirty conditions, we refer to surfaces that are visibly dirty. For example, in a food manufacturing plant, if there is meat pieces lying around, that would be a visibly dirty surface. So we simulate both of those conditions during testing, depending on the application of your product. And then you also might want to use the disinfectant for hands. So that is another specific area where it can be used. The main point of this is that efficacy has to be scientifically proven, which means that the product has to be tested by a laboratory and that you have to obtain a certificate of analysis of the test performed. So there is really a lot of confusion when it comes to what should be tested. And we sometimes get requests from clients asking us to test SANS 1853 for them. However, this standard is not really, in essence, a test that we can perform. It is a guideline which highlights various aspects that you have to comply with. So this is the example also mentioned by Tandu, where they look at your production facility, your packaging, toxicity, and then, of course, the efficacy of your product, which is where laboratories come in. So you have to ask yourself the question, what do you want to achieve by testing? Do you want to apply for NRCS registration, which we just heard is mandatory as well? Then your SABS approval, do you want to support a specific claim? For example, you want to say that your product is bactericidal, fungicidal, or virucidal, or all of those. Or maybe you're just somebody who's using the product and you would like to have peace of mind. And this also counts for suppliers. If you are supplying a product, you want to make sure that your product is actually effective. So there are very few SANAS accredited laboratories in South Africa which can test at least some of the requirements that you need to adhere to. And in this table, I've summarized some of the requirements and then also indicated if it can be tested in South Africa or not. So looking at the SANS 51276, which also correlates with EN 1276, that is tested in South Africa and it is done by SANAS accredited laboratories. If you would like to test your product on a surface where we simulate a specific non-porous surface, you might want to consider testing SANS 53697 or then EN 13697. That is also tested in South Africa and SANAS accredited. If you would like to see if your product is yeasticidal or fungicidal, you will test SANS 51650 or then EN 1650, which is tested in South Africa. At the moment, we're not aware of any accredited laboratories doing that. I just want to mention that these indications that I have here is based on our current knowledge and it is subject to change should the information become available. Then the two important ones late in the current times of COVID is virucidal efficacy. And both of those, according to our knowledge, are not tested in South Africa and therefore obviously also not SANAS accredited. They are, however, tested abroad, but it is quite a mission to get that completed as far as we are aware. So I chose the SANS 51276 and 51650 as an example to show how the tests are being conducted because they are very similar in method. So I'm going to give a very simplified example of the procedure of testing. So you would start with adding your disinfectant to a test tube containing your bacteria, fungi or yeast, depending on which standard you want to comply with. And then you will give it a specific contact time in which it has time to do what it is supposed to do, in other words, destroy the organisms. So for hand sanitizers, the contact time is usually 50 or 60 seconds. And for all your other disinfectants, it is in increments of 5 minutes up to 1 hour. So you cannot test it for longer than an hour according to the standard. So after this contact time, you need to neutralize, in other words, stop the reaction of the chemical. You then plate out the solution and incubate to see what the surviving number of organisms are. And this will help you to calculate a log reduction. So based on the log reduction, which is then the difference between what you started with and what is left after the contact time, you need to achieve a specific log reduction. And then that will help us to determine if your product complies with the standard that you tested it against. So as I mentioned, this is a very simplified example. It is in actual fact quite a lot of petri dishes that you use, a lot of tubes, but in the end it gives a clear view of the log reduction achieved. And then just some questions that you can ask of your suppliers, or if you are a supplier, you can also ask yourself these questions. Do you have a valid MSDS sheet of the product? Is it registered or certified? And has toxicology studies been performed? For example, if you're going to use the product in a food contact surface area, you need to have proven toxicology reports to show that it is not harmful. You have to read the claims that your supplier makes. For example, are they saying it kills all viruses, including COVID-19? No matter what claims they make, you need to ask for scientific proof. In other words, a certificate of analysis from a laboratory proving that it does in actual fact kill all viruses or bacteria or whatever the case might be.
Certificate of analysis.
Also remember that just because a product kills bacteria, it does not mean that it will be effective against fungi, mold or viruses and vice versa. So you have to test it specifically for the organism that you would like to kill. So also you can ask, does your product comply with a specific standard like the SANS 151276? And then also, what is the impact of your product on the environment? So if you could have a green sanitizer or a green disinfectant that limits the impact on the environment, that would also be advantageous. Thank you for your time, and I'm sure there will be time for questions also.
Definitely, Chantal, definitely. Okay, so if we go back to that table, and I'm going to bring the chemical company back online. I see Mark, you've joined us as well. Great. We'd love to have some comments from you and the group that you've got in the background. Brett, let's bring it in from your side. And Tandu, I'd also like to ask you to comment on some of these issues. When it comes to the compulsory specification for chemical disinfectants, some of these methods are in fact mentioned within that specification. Am I correct, Tandu? So in other words, when a chemical company comes to you for registration, they actually would have had to have their product tested against one or more of these test methods. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. The compulsory specification calls up certain standards. So the company would have had to test against those standards mentioned there. So what it does is, when we write a compulsory specification, we make the standards mandatory, because the standards on their own are voluntary standards. So when we mention it in a compulsory specification, we've made it mandatory that you must comply to that particular standard.
Absolutely. Okay. Brett, when it comes to you as a manufacturer, in terms of the process of testing your products, Chantal has mentioned some of the, I suppose, the things that you would have to comply with. Is this your experience? I mean, is this what you would be doing as a manufacturer? Perhaps Mark, you'd also like to. Brett, over to you.
Sorry, I'm just wondering, is that Mark Sterling that's online?
Yes, that's right, but go ahead.
So without a shadow of a doubt, I mean, that's the process that gets followed, and it's both, I mean, for all the reasons that were previously listed, you know, for peace of mind, for consumer protection, from environmental protection, from its efficacy, for all those reasons. I mean, we can't put our name and our brand behind a product that hasn't, you know, undergone this, the test and the process itself.
And Brett, do you find that people are asking you these questions? I mean, are these reasonable questions to ask of a supplier, do you think?
Listen, so I think in our instance it's a little bit different. We do focus on the food industry as such, and I think that we've been through the processes where we've got approved chemical matrices, where all the MSDS and technical data sheets have been submitted. So you know, in our instance, that is in place. In terms of and a lot of the decontamination services, if you want to call it that, we're doing it for our extended customer base. So people know us, they understand that you know, we are a credible company with a credible brand. But so we're not really operating in the marketplace of sort of the smaller guys just phoning us. But I mean, certainly my advice for these guys is, without a shadow of a doubt, you should be asking these questions. Yes.
Absolutely. Chantal, a difficult one. Have you ever tested products that fail?
Yes, of course. Unfortunately, yes.
Okay, right. So I think, you know, this is the reality of it, that there could be products on the market that actually don't do what they are supposed to do in accordance with international standards, which they should actually be tested again, and which are in fact part of the legal requirement. Thank you, Chantal. We'll come back to you. I'm now going to ask Andy Booth to join us, and Andy is from SGS, and he's going to be talking a little bit about the processes that need to be in place with regards to managing this within the workplace. And Andy is the Global Technical Manager from SGS, and I think from that perspective, he's got a wealth of experience, because besides his 30 years experience within the food industry, we've got a number of countries that are a little bit ahead of us, I think, on the curve when it comes to COVID-19, and I think we can all definitely benefit from what's happening globally. You know, and Andy, I'm really very interested to hear, because you'll be able to give us a perspective of countries that have been through what we're going through, but they've actually kind of further ahead in terms of the progress. So over to you. Looking forward to your presentation.
Well, hello everyone. Thanks, Linda. Good morning, everyone. So I'm going to take a slightly different approach in the presentation. I'm with SGS, and I work for the certification part of SGS, second party certification in particular. And over the last few months, much of my time has been spent looking at various schemes, products, processes to get people, companies, catering, food service sector companies back up and running after COVID-19. Now, we do globally. What I will say is that there's no country anywhere that I've come across that has completely come through this COVID-19 situation. The UK, for instance, we're just coming out of lockdown, but looking at the newspaper this morning, there's all sorts of comments out, the news flashes coming up about a potential second wave. So it's a very fluid situation, very difficult to get a clear picture of where we're going to go going forward. So what we've done within SGS is taking a view that although we can't see what's going to happen in the future, we can try to predict that, but we can very much put processes and systems in place to help you as suppliers, as caterers, food service companies, to actually demonstrate to your client base that you are in control and you've taken all necessary measures. Obviously, there's no absolute guarantees. That's clear from the other presentation. But to show that to demonstrate confidence to your client base. So, with that in mind, I'll talk about a couple of routes that we've taken here. I don't want to make this into a sales pitch, but I do need to show you what sort of options you have to show compliance. And two main routes. These are second party schemes that we offer. we've taken a standalone checklist called a COVID-19 addendum checklist. And this takes into account all the main global bodies who CDC, European Centre for Disease Control, etc. There's more than on the slide there. But we look at the best practice and we try to pull in all the regulations. A real problem because they differ country to country, as you'll be aware, and they change week by week. And this scheme is designed to give companies the confidence to restart or expand current operations and to protect both the staff and the customers within each of these operations. And it lays down very strict rules that can be audited. And once you can audit something, then you can obviously show that you have these controls in place. And if it's an external audit, you get a certificate or some validation that those controls have been checked by a professional external body that can then show to your customers. This particular route we have on the screen here, the addendum can work as, you see at the bottom, as a standalone audit with or without surveillance audits, a remote audit. Well, obviously we can't visit all sites yet. In the UK, it's still very difficult to go out to sites. In a lot of the rest of Europe, sites are reopening. Customers will let us go back on site. Or it can be added as an addendum to other schemes. So say you already have a food safety audit scheme in place, you can add this addendum on top of that. So you can do your food safety audit, and then you can add a version of this addendum onto. We have factory restarts, even the GFSI and the catering scheme. You can add it on there. So that's one approach we've taken. That's proving we're getting a lot of interest in that, particularly on the back of things like our hygiene monitor mark, which some of you may be familiar with. Second route. Bit of background on this one. When I started looking at this issue, when my boss said, you know, how we're going to manage COVID-19 in the food and the catering sector, as Brett alluded to earlier, a lot of the control you already have in place as food professionals are the same sorts of control you need for COVID-19. Good hygiene, correct PPE, clear processes. So I tried to build on those, and we put this scheme in place on top of an existing scheme we run for the catering and food service sector. The scheme is actually called HACCP for catering, and we added COVID-19 questions to it. We say addendum, they're actually just additional questions into the checklist. This program is aimed very specifically at the catering food service market, and it covers some modular design. You pick the elements you want, and it covers even things like satellite kitchens, where you have or container kitchens, we tend to call them in the UK, takeaway operations, and even delivery only operations, which are again a big growth area. So this program will target those areas where we'd like to see a lot of growth as we come out of COVID, and if we move into the post-COVID world, the new way of working. People are going to want more food delivered. The advantage of this one, and its target was that nobody wants too many audits. Safe to say, as an ex-auditor, but you do need them for food safety. So in this case, you take your food safety audit on this scheme, and the COVID controls are built into that. You don't need another audit, which is generally good. It also allows for, as we move beyond COVID, and I think we all see there'll be some point in the future where COVID will hopefully be a distant memory, or possibly a nightmare, they can then take these COVID questions out. You just click in the system and those questions are disabled. So you then come back, you still keep your food safety standard, but without COVID-19. But all the way through, I've looked very much at the leveraging the food safety controls and experience you've got into COVID-19. I think that's a very important thing for you all to recognise that many of the controls you need, experience, skill sets are already there. So I'm going to look now at some of the procedures, the controls and the testing you might want to put in place. Now, this is a very brief summary, but hopefully I've got the key areas. So demonstrating to people that you have control, getting your plant, your site, restaurant, under control. What do you need? What are the top level documents? First thing, senior management commitment. If the owner, the top management are not committed, not providing the resource to COVID-19, then our COVID-19 control, it's not going to work. It all comes down from the top. You need commitment at the top level, and you need the correct amounts of resource, money, time to be put into that, as I said before, for food safety. Then you need a risk assessment, and you need a dedicated, detailed COVID-19 risk assessment. And I know here you're thinking, well, I do HACCP or a variant thereof. Can we do the same for COVID-19? Absolutely. It's the same approach. You use skilled staff who understand the risks. You look at every part of your process, however big or small that is. You look at the legislation, the best practice, you document it, and you put the controls in place. The key difference with COVID is obviously it's not food safety. The risks are slightly different, very different in some cases, and it's a much more fluid situation. The legislation and the best practice here can change daily. Certainly in the UK, it's changing on a daily basis. So when you put your risk assessment in place, you must review that weekly, daily, whatever it takes. And you must have somebody who fully understands the legislation. Then you need to put in the actual controls. Key one there, again, as Brett said earlier, personal protective equipment and hand washing. This is an infection that's controlled largely by keeping away from people, by removing these droplets which contain the viral particles, and by hand washing. So do people know how you wash your hands in the food industry? Do you need to do that more often? Do you need more sanitizers in place? Do you need more workstations? Are you wearing the correct PPE? It's a big area. Can you prove it? Is the policy in place so staff know what to do? If I go into a site, an example there from the UK, there's been a lot of confusion. The government have not been 100% clear on when we should wear masks. They have now clarified that, but if I go into a restaurant, into a site, into a food manufacturing kitchen, should I have a mask on? Should I be wearing gloves? Should I wash my hands once the gloves are on? Should I take wearing a coat? Should I take that off when I leave? That you need absolute clarity there. The standards are going to be higher and different in some respects than they will be just for food safety. That needs to be a clear documented policy. You need to really demonstrate that to people. Your operating procedures, work instructions need to be changed, need to be updated. And in many cases, you don't need to redo these completely because those controls will already be in place. You will have access control generally to the site, certainly to the kitchen and sensitive areas. But you need to change that. You need to limit the number of people in there. How do you check that? How do people know? Have the cleaning procedures increased? Probably have. Probably different targets in terms of hygiene. Physical segregation, working practices are new things to staff. It's difficult for all of us to learn keeping these 2 metre, and UK has more changed to 1 metre segregation, and it's not always possible in a food environment. If it's not possible, what alternative do you have in place? Do you wear masks? Do you stagger the way people across their workbenches? Lots of options. It needs to be clearly documented. And next step down from that is obviously you need to train people. People are doing these procedures, they need to clearly understand them. So if I was to go into a site and say, okay, I can see you've got some great procedures in here. How do I know people are following them? Well, I'm going to watch them. I'm also going to look at the training records. Policies in the event of infection on site. I'm sure you all have the food poisoning policies, but what do you do if somebody comes in and says, oh, I've got symptoms, or my wife, when my child has symptoms of COVID or was tested positive? You need to control all of those. Are they removed from site? Are they isolated? How do you trace who they've been near? So far too big an area to cover all the options and solutions in this brief conversation, but that is such a key area. If someone comes in and says, I've got COVID-19 or I've been exposed to COVID-19, what are you going to do? How are you going to protect your site, your customers? It needs to react quickly, it needs to be clear actions there. And people need to know they can report owners. And there needs to be some clarity there and some assurance when people look at your procedures that people can safely report the fact they've got COVID symptoms in a secure environment. They don't need to feel that there can't be the risk that by people are not going to report it because they're worried that they'll lose their job, lose money. They need to understand it's for the public good and for their own good. Well, difficult thing to put in place. Again, that needs to be clearly documented. So you've got your documentation, you've got your procedures. How do you actually check this? As an auditor, I'll go out and we'll watch what people do, we'll look at the procedures, but it's not, auditors are not the people who will control and keep your site safe, it's yourselves. So when you train the staff, is the training clear? Is it done by somebody with enough experience? And how do you go back and check people understand the controls? The staff screening. So are you actually checking people when they come in? Are you taking temperatures? Are you checking all the health declarations? Who's responsible for that? What are the rules there? What would flag something? What would flag up a concern in terms of a temperature, in terms of a health declaration? If somebody reports a colleague is coughing or doesn't sing very well, what do you do? Monitoring of personal hygiene compliance, such a difficult area. In food safety, the same thing applies here. How do you make sure people are washing their hands, wearing the correct PPE, changing the gloves at the right frequency? Absolutely key. We must have checks in there, be it automated checks, be it even putting CCTV in so people know they have to wash their hands, people are watching, getting people to actually sign when they've done it, training the supervisors and managers to monitor that area. Then the monitoring of the new working practices. A lot of catering, a lot of food services are very tight, very compact environment. We don't waste space in the industry, clear. We're now asking people to keep apart, to limit the number of people in an area, to not congregate, to not use communal areas, to follow that intent. It needs to be to prove to people that that is in place. People are following the one-way routes. They're not just doing it when you're watching. So clear monitoring, again, CCTV, but it all comes back to the training. People need to know why they're doing it. Cleaning and hygiene checks. As Brett, I think, in fact, as everyone has touched on during these conversations, you're going to have to do more cleaning, different cleaning, possibly different chemicals, which you need to verify they're the correct ones. Do you have the records? Discuss your chemicals are safe, effective, and can you prove that cleaning has been done? So I get a lot of questions, probably more questions than any other in this section when we're doing work with companies. Say, should we be tested for COVID-19 specifically? And we do that. SGS offer a COVID-19 surface check. No value in that, or very limited value. The issue is that area clean? Have you got effective hygiene? So an ATP swab, etc., will generally be more effective than a specific COVID-19 check. You need to know, or a traditional swab even, has that area been cleaned? Has it been cleaned at the right frequency? If it's clean, then you have controlled the COVID-19 risk. If it's there or not. To actually find the organism would involve somebody actually coming in and sneezing on a surface before you take the test. Fairly unlikely, high risk strategy. Packaging hygiene, something we'd never really considered before. When you take out you bring a parcel in, when you bring product into site, it's been handled. In the UK, we get a lot of Amazon deliveries at the moment. Do they need to be wiped down? When it goes on the shelf, do you take the outer packaging off? How long can it sit there before you can be sure it's clear? You need to sanitize it. Delivery, staff, operations. Delivery is really taking off. Takeaway and delivery, something that we've perhaps not looked at in the detail we would in other areas previously. So how do we control, as an example, the delivery drivers? Uber Eats, Just Eat in the UK, there's so many variants of that. How do we know that they are following the contactless delivery protocols? How do we know that they are protected when they make the delivery? And we also need to consider the difference between checks we have in place, front of house, back of house. So staff versus the public, and the staff public interactions, be that on the doorstep, as a guy brings in the Domino's pizza, in the UK, they drop, they basically put on your doorstep on another piece of cardboard for safety, so it doesn't touch the floor, and then they back away. You can't pay cash, it's all paid by card or online. So that level of control. In a restaurant, you're taking orders. How do you control that? Big thing in the UK and American restaurants is to kneel down in front of your client when you're taking an order to get face to face with them. You really don't want to be doing that at the moment. You want to be keeping a distance when you take an order. So many areas to consider. So you need to look at the splits and the interactions, and that's all in the risk assessment. Huge area. It is covered in our audit standard. It's something that every site is different. If you're a small, intimate restaurant, your risks are so much higher than, say, a fast throughput fast food operation. The risks exist in both cases. Okay, so you've got your procedure in place, you've got your checks in place, you've changed your procedure, you're cleaning your high touch areas, key area. How do you prove to people when it comes in? People want to know, the public want to be sure, the regulators want to be sure, auditors will want to be sure. How do you demonstrate that to people? Well, first thing, let's go back to that risk assessment. If you can show to people that you've completed dedicated, clear risk assessment, people can actually look and say, okay, this is the controls we've put in place for these risks that we've identified. So, for instance, we had a salad bar where public serve themselves. We've taken that out. The risk assessment says you don't want this people serving themselves salad touching the same utensils. You might have touch screen ordering, as many fast food areas do now. Touch screens, high touch area, people are going up, breathing on it, worst case sneezing, coughing on it. What do? You take them out, do you clean them every 10, 15 minutes? Do you change the surface to an antiviral surface? That sort of control. You need to be able to prove that. It's no good saying just, okay, we've done this, we think it's okay. You need proof in place. Hygiene records. And what more of those? If you're doing swabs, ATP or traditional, people are going to want to see those results. Is your cleaning effective? Can you prove that cleaning has been done? Does the staff know it's been checked? Staff screening, health records. How many people have come on site? Records of staff and visitors. So if I came onto your site to do an audit or as a salesperson, have you checked my health declaration? To do it before I come on site? I have to email you with it. How do you do it as I come on site? What do you do if I say I've got cold symptoms? It's a difficult area. Notice today I'm sort of sniffing a bit. That's hay fever. It's hay fever season in the UK. How do you know I've got hay fever? I've not got COVID. Such a difficult area. You must control that. You must ask the right questions. So because I perhaps sneeze when I come on site, do you do an additional temperature check? Do you exclude me from site? Major, and people will want to see the records for that. If somebody worst case comes back and says, we came to your restaurant, to your site, we bought your food, we've become infected with COVID-19, we think we caught it in your site. What defense have you got? You've only got your records to step back on. Should be doing self-assessment, we said before, monitoring internal audits, and you might have external audits, a company like ours. Finally, need a crisis plan. If it all goes terribly wrong, if you get lots of people getting infected or a significant number, what do? Do you stay open? Do you close? Do you have temporary staff solutions? So you need a clear crisis plan on top of the risk assessment. So I was going to talk, I looked for some case studies. To be honest, it's too early in the situation. Every country I look at has slightly different situations. We are selling these products, our products, into the market. We're hearing the questions that I came up with then, particularly in terms of testing. We hear the question about, are chemicals effective? What chemicals should we use? Has anybody put in a perfect system to guarantee they'll have complete control of the COVID? No, that's impossible. There's no absolute guarantees. Have people put in effective systems based around risk assessment? Yes. What's the common element in all of these? I would pick up the points: risk assessment, training, monitoring, and a crisis plan. They're the key things. Nobody has been successful without having those in place. How it's going to develop over the next few months, who knows? I say at the moment in the UK, we've slightly relaxed the lockdown. We can now speak to people within 1 metre, but catering environment to people, how do you recognise 1 metre? The bars, our restaurants are going to open again on the 4th of July, I was told yesterday. Good news. But does anybody want to go into a bar and restaurant? Certainly, I wouldn't want to be going in unless I knew that site had adequate controls. How do you prove that for them? You need, at the end of the day, you need some sort of external certificate or something that can say, like, we've got these controls in place. This is the piece of paper. This is the certificate that we've followed. So, thank you for your time there. And I'll hand back to Linda in case of any questions.
Thanks, Andy. Thank you very much. I think that it was really great to hear you reinforcing some of the things that have been discussed in a number of forums, and that being the need for records and the need for enough due diligence to be able to prove that you are doing the right things. Unfortunately, our legal requirements in South Africa don't require a restaurant to have a HACCP system, but they do require them to have certain documentation in place to at least demonstrate process control. And so we're, what you've suggested of using that and leveraging that for your COVID-19 strategy, I think is really great, because that's exactly what we've been suggesting, to rather kill 2 birds with 1 stone. So thank you very much for everything that you've shared with us. We've run out of time, but I have one very important question which somebody has raised, and I'd like to pose this question to Mrs. Magolega, and that being, what is the difference between a disinfectant and a sanitizer? So you have very clearly spelt out for us that there is currently no legal requirement in South Africa for hand sanitizers to be registered with the NRCS. We have no legal mandate to do that as yet. I can only hope and pray that this will happen soon. If I call something a sanitizer, does that make it different now for surfaces? If I call something a sanitizer and not a disinfectant, does that exclude it from the regulation?
No, it doesn't. There's different names. We've tried listing some of the names used to describe disinfectants in the compulsory specification. So a sanitizer does form part of the regulations if it's used on inanimate surfaces.
Yeah, so I think that's the important thing, is an inanimate surface is part of the definition, and that's why we have this, currently we have the loophole in terms of the hand sanitizers, am I correct?
Yes, inanimate surfaces are covered, and hand sanitizers are not covered in the NRCS scope, but they are covered in other regulatory areas, as I had given you, for example, SAPRA in terms of medical devices.
Yeah. So in other words, if I have a product that is going into a hospital theatre, then obviously by implication that would definitely need to be registered with SAPRA. But something for domestic use is the grey area which we currently have in the country, which is cause for grave concern.
Yes, that's where the problem is at the moment. Yeah, it's use. So anything you would get off clicks or Pick and Pay shelf, that's not covered at the moment.
Absolutely, and I think even many of the retail pharmacies, regardless of the reputation or regardless, the product currently could say whatever they like, because currently it is an area that is not effectively regulated, particularly in terms of the risk of the current pandemic. Mrs. Magolega, if there's anything we can do to help you to sort this one out, please let us know, because I know that everyone on the line is very concerned about this and would like to make sure that we are protected. And of course, with the restaurants opening up, we don't want them to, you know, have another problem. Thank you very much to all the presenters for your very, very thorough presentations. Thank you for your very frank remarks in relation to the services and the activities that are involved in making sure that when we clean for COVID-19, we do it in the correct way with the correct governance and the correct controls in place. The last piece of advice I would like to give you, if you're listening out there and you're a food manufacturer, you're a food processor, you're a restaurateur, you're a quick service restaurant, please make sure you ask the right questions before you buy the cheapest product, because at the end of the day, lives are at stake. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks for joining Food Focus.